does God tell me about himself? What is he telling me about who he is? That means his nature. What does God tell me about how he works? What is God telling me that I should expect from him? When I'm reading the book of Exodus, I'm also looking and saying, what does it say about humanity? What does it say he believes about people? What does it say he wants people to do? What does it say? So as I'm reading the book, I'm not just reading a story like it's a fairy tale. I'm saying, he has told them to do. He says, I did this, now you do this. So when I approach God, God is telling me that I'm not just a Santa Claus that you just come to and you make demands off of. There's responsibility that goes along with God. The Exodus tells me that God can and will deliver, but it also tells me that God also demands something of me. He demands a response. And so, once again, as I'm reading this book, I learned then that some of my expectations about why didn't God do and why didn't God do this and why didn't God do that may not be biblical, because I'm really not basing them upon how God introduced himself to me. I'm looking at God through a fairy tale or through a series of stories that maybe I've created in my own head. Imagine God says, I wrote stories so you can know me. So when I'm reading it thinking about, wow, God is presenting himself, and he's saying, this is how I think. This is how I'll approach you. This is what I will do. This is what I won't do. This is what makes me happy. This is what makes me mad. When I get mad, you can expect this. When I'm happy, you can expect that. When I deliver, but I don't just deliver so that you can just have your way. Clear enough, right? Right. So Exodus is it tells me this. So I'm reading the book and I'm saying, what does God even tell me about my purpose? So Israel, a nation, is created in Exodus. What is their purpose? What is God asking them? What is God telling them? Does he just create them and then say, good, go do your thing? He creates them, he delivers them, and then in Exodus 19:6, he says, now, since I've done this, he says, you are going to be my people. He says, I saved you and I brought you to me. So now, wait, I'm working with a possessive God. I'm working with a God who will then make demands about me. He says, now you are going to be now my kingdom of priests. There's an assignment that I have for you. So I'm never just saved so that my life can be freed up so I can be a better, bigger, bolder me. So when I'm reading the book of Exodus, I'm like, wow, wow. So a lot of these things a lot of the framework when I look at God, that I may be looking at framing my theology around may not be biblical, because it's not necessarily how God operates. Did he operate with Moses like that? Did he tell Moses, man, listen, you're going to be my prophet so you can be freed up? No. Does he respond to Moses and say, because you're frustrated, don't worry about it? Am I making sense? So think about, man, when I get mad with God and I get frustrated with God and I'm like, well, God, I'm just not going to do it. Does God say, okay? Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to inconvenience you. So how does God use tragedy in our lives? How does God use triumph in our lives? So these are questions. So when I'm reading the book of Exodus, read it through this prism now. Don't just read it through the prism of Joseph of the Prince of Egypt. Don't just read it from that prism. Read it thinking about what is God saying. Exodus can be, when I look at the Exodus, what I'm looking at is the gospel of the Old Testament. Because in Exodus, God tells me the story of his redemption, of him redeeming Israel from Egypt. I see a type of Christ, Moses, a type of Satan, Pharaoh, a type of sin, Egypt, a type of baptism, the Red Sea, a type of sanctification, the wilderness. Am I making sense? And so now it tells me what I can expect as a believer, that God can deliver me, but he delivered me to be his. He can deliver me and he will deliver me, but he can raise up a redeemer. But the redeemer is not one that frees me, but the redeemer is one who frees me so that I can serve. Am I making sense? So Exodus is this Old Testament gospel. Why? It records grace. When we talk about that there's no grace in the Old Testament, if you can imagine, the Exodus is all about grace. They didn't deserve it, but God did all the work. It is not something where it's just judgment. We're like, ooh, them plagues. Remember, the plagues were for the non-believers. Am I making sense? So Exodus is talking about grace. In Exodus, we see deliverance. We see now the good news. We see how God miraculously delivers descendants. Who? The descendants of Jacob from slavery. And he sends them on a journey. So we see grace. We see redemption. We see deliverance. We see faith. We see faith because we see the believers having to move out and believe God for miracles. We see them having to move to the Red Sea. We see them having to move through the Red Sea. We see them having to believe that this deliverer, man of God, is Moses. We see them believing God for water. We see them believing God for provision. So we see the idea of faith in the book of Exodus. We see also the idea of how do I have a relationship with the king? In other words, how do we respond to the divine action of God? Exodus is a great book when you want to know, well, how do I deal with God? If God helps me, what is my responsibility? Because God then gets them in Mount Sinai and he says, you see what I've done. Now, since I've done this, let's talk about now what you're going to do. So that means this. Exodus tells me, since it's the gospel of the New Testament, that I am saved unto responsibility. I am saved unto an assignment that I have to respond to God about. I am not saved just to live my life and be free, which is really interesting because it goes against many of the theological dynamics that are preached today, where you are delivered from your haters, you are delivered if everything gonna turn around, and then it just becomes about you. Right. Exodus, we see very clearly, even though they're delivered, they get miracles, they get provisions, but it ain't about them. Am I making sense? So when I hear that theological framework, Exodus teaches us that I got to be a little leery of that. It does not mean God's not good. It does not mean that God can't deliver. He does all that. But even in him being good, gracious, and miraculous, there is still a relationship I have with a king. It is not a relationship with a peer. It is not a relationship of entitlement. It is a relationship saying, my God, you've done this. Now I have to respond. Am I making sense? So Exodus can never be read alone. It has to be read and understood through the prism of Genesis. Because Exodus is the continuation of this story. And it starts with a Hebrew word that says, so this happened. It starts with, and this happened. So anything that starts with so or and in Hebrew is saying that everything that's happening that I'm about to talk about is based upon something else that happened. And so to truly understand what's happening in Exodus, I've got to get a grip on what's happening in Genesis. Am I making sense? Otherwise, you're just going to read through them names, Naphtali, blah, 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 and you're going to throw it all away and not going to look at it. And you don't realize that this book is the continuation of this story. Am I making sense? And those people are significant. Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I just read, I don't know who none of them are. Well, you need to know who they are because this story is the continuation of their story. Am I making sense? And this story that I'm about to tell you in Exodus is connected to all that drama in Genesis. And it's telling you that, so when I'm reading the first 5 verses of Exodus, I have to be redirected to Genesis chapter 12 through Genesis chapter 50. Because each name has a story. And each story has a background. Am I helping somebody? Episode body. So you could do a study on each one of these names and then pull out the principles of how to operate and how to see God and how to flow with God and how to work in certain contexts and everything else just from the names. First 5 verses, am I all right? Verse 6 then it says, okay, now I'm finna transition you. Verse 6 says this, and then Joseph died. So verse 6 says, now remember I told you, verse 1 is and. I'm hooking you up to Genesis. The next 5 verses are, now let me tell you what happened in Genesis 12 through 50. So now the book starts with a review and connects me back to the history, right? And then, am I going too fast for you? Am I too deep for you? All right. And then verse 6 says, and Joseph died. So we see now a transition that happens with the leader dies. And when Joseph dies, now we see a transition between generations. So basically verses 1 through 5 say, this is where we came from, then Joseph died. Right. And when Joseph died, everything you're going to see now is going to happen after Joseph died. Okay. One generation shifts. And now we are starting the beginning of a shift in generations, right? So now, and we see now that a godly leader transitions out. So we see a new generation being born and new things starting to happen. And then in Genesis, and then verse 7 is interesting because verse 7, it says, well, before I move on, I want to point you back to Genesis chapter 1 and Genesis chapter 11 through 11 again. Verse 7, if you read Exodus chapter 1, verse 7, you're going to see something very interesting. You're going to see a repeat of the command that God gave Adam in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And you're going to see a repeat of the command that God gave Noah in Genesis chapter 9, verse 1. I'm going to say it again. In Genesis chapter 7, verse 7 on chapter 1, you're going to see God repeat what he said to Adam in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. And you're going to see a repeat of what he said to Noah in Genesis chapter 9, verse 11. When he tells them to be fruitful, go forth and multiply. You remember that in Genesis chapter 28? Now you're going to see it here because now he says, and the Hebrew people grew, and they were fruitful, and they multiplied, and they filled, and the text says, and they filled the land. That word for land in Exodus chapter 1, verse 7 is the same word as earth in Genesis chapter 1, verse 28. So you see God saying, okay, this is what happened when now, as I told you it was going to happen, my plan has never changed. We're still on my plan. Am I making sense?
Thank you for worshiping with us today. If you like this message, you can find the rest at cmllcstore.com. We invite you to join us again for our extraordinary worship services every Sunday at 10:30 a.m., Sundays at 4 p.m., and Wednesdays at 7:30 p.m. Central, where Dr. Moody teaches how to understand the Bible, and you can get all your biblical questions answered. We look forward to connecting with you. We ask that you subscribe to The Rock ATX on YouTube and follow The Rock ATX on Facebook and Instagram to stay connected to all The Rock is doing. You can also get connected on our website at therockatx.org. Again, thank you for worshiping with us and be blessed.